Thank you, Mason, and I hope very soon that you become one of the next professionals in this room. I'd now like to introduce two very distinguished guests who will be sharing their insights and expertise on the upcoming presidential election in our political panel discussion today. First and foremost, we have Mr. Scott Jennings. Scott is a seasoned political commentator, strategist, and analyst known for his insightful commentary on national and local politics. He has a wealth of experience in campaign management and political communications. Scott brings a unique perspective to the discussion that is sure to enlighten and engage everybody in this room. Along with Scott we have Kentucky Electric Cooperatives' own Vice President of Strategic Communications, Mr. Joe Arnold. Together, Scott and Joe bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and expertise to our panel discussion, and I have no doubt their contributions will provide you all with a comprehensive and insightful analysis of the upcoming presidential election. Please help me welcome Scott Jennings and Joe Arnold.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, Scott.
Joe.
Hello. Scott's going to be, he's getting prepared for hand-to-hand combat. You'll be going to the Democratic National Convention?
Yes, I have my helmet and flak jacket ready. I was very popular at the Republican National Convention. I don't expect to be as popular in Chicago. We'll see. I don't know. You never know.
Let's get right to it, though. Obviously, just seismic changes in the presidential election. I should let me grab my clicker real quick here so we can advance that and look at our candidates.
Yeah.
We'll pull those up if we can. There they are.
The new candidates.
The new candidates. So just we're going to take a look at an electoral map here in a minute, but before we get there, how did we get here?
Well, great question. How did a person who got 0 votes become the nominee for a political party? It really was a remarkable thing that happened. I was on the set in Atlanta the night of the debate that CNN hosted between Biden and Trump, and my immediate reaction to the debate was this candidacy has fallen. That's what I said on the air. And it took 3 weeks for the Democrats to convince Joe Biden that it had. It wasn't until yesterday, I don't know if you guys saw CBS Face the Nation yesterday, but Biden finally admitted why he dropped out of the race, which was that he said senior Democrats told him that he was going to be a drag on the ticket for everyone else. I mean, that was his stated reason. He'd never really said why he got out. But that's what he's saying now. It's pretty remarkable that somebody who got 81 million votes 4 years ago and 14 million votes in the primary is no longer his party and sits in the Oval Office, is no longer his party's nominee. So I'm still sort of stunned by the whole thing, and so is Donald Trump. I mean, he's obviously stunned by it and is still grappling with a completely different race than he was hoping to run this year. He had his framework down against Biden, strength versus weakness. They were relentlessly prosecuting the case, and they've not yet found the framework that they're going to use against Harris. But they better hurry up because it's a totally different race. It's a toss-up, but there's no question who has the momentum right now.
We'll show us some figures coming up on all of that, but I'm going to go ahead and let's just talk about a little context here if we can, Scott, and go to 4 years ago.
Yep.
And the electoral map. Just so we can kind of set the stage for where we are today and where we were 4 years ago.
Well, Biden obviously got over 300 electoral votes, and he did it on the strength of a couple of states in the Sun Belt, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. And he also did it by rebuilding the old industrial blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Interestingly, I don't know if anybody remembers where the term blue wall came from. It came from a magazine article written by a guy named Ron Brownstein, who was complaining to me at CNN last week that he used to call the blue wall 18 states. Now it's been reduced down to 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But that's effectively what happened. The Sun Belt started to crack, which traditionally has been Republican, and he rebuilt the blue wall. So that's where you start as a Democrat. Can you replicate this? And if you can't, what can you lose and still get to 270?
So that's where we were 4 years ago. Let's talk a little bit about I'll fast forward here to actually number one thing. This is just a little trivia. The fact that because of the census, of course, every 10 years, the Electoral College has been reapportioned. So there is somewhat of a net gain for Republicans based upon the past votes.
Yeah, just a slight advantage beyond what they had. But as we'll see in future maps, I don't expect it to be the deciding factor in the election.
So this is the map right now that we're showing of the current no toss-ups.
Yeah.
This is the breakdown is as far as the recent polling is concerned, and this can change, and we'll show some recent polling changes momentarily. But right now, 235 for Republicans, 226 for Democrats. But this is not a stable map.
It is not, and it's changed a lot. In the old Biden-Trump matchup, every strategist from both parties had already admitted that the Sun Belt was gone for Democrats. So if we were looking at this in the before times, before Kamala, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, all gone. And so Republicans were a lot closer. Trump was a lot closer to 270 than he is right now. And even in some of the old iterations of this, there were people who believed Pennsylvania was light red and leaning towards the Republicans. With Harris in the race and the most recent round of polling that we've seen, it's pretty obvious the map and the sort of the toss-up states that we thought we were starting with at the beginning of all this are back. And also another thing that's different is that prior to Harris, against Biden, Trump and his people really did believe that New Hampshire, Minnesota, New Mexico were all in play. And maybe Virginia, were all now moving towards the possibility of being in play. A much larger map. That's gone now at this point. So for Trump, it's now a much smaller proposition. And for us as analysts, we're back to the states that we thought at the beginning of the cycle that would be the toss-up states. They are the toss-up states again. The map is smaller than it was back in July.
Which is interesting. Let's talk about what happened between July and now. And perhaps it was characterized by this news conference that Donald Trump had last week. It's just a candidate. I'm not saying it's off the rails, but not disciplined.
Well, if anyone in here has ever done anything for 90 minutes, it's hard to stay disciplined for 90 minutes. And it's what makes golf so hard. It's hard to do something for 4 hours, like mentally to stay in it for that long. To talk for 90 straight minutes is difficult to do. And to stay focused and on message for 90 straight minutes is hard to do. And as a PR person, I would just tell you, no message should last 90 minutes. You need to find something that lasts 30 seconds and get in and get out. But Trump, I think, is trying to wrest control of the media attention back away from Harris. I mean, he was enjoying a situation where he was either dominating it or Biden was dominating it, but in a bad way. I mean, he really kind of was manipulating it. He was pulling the strings. Now, since Harris got into the race, nobody's ever had a run of media coverage the way Harris has. Her entrance into the race, her quickly consolidating the Democrats around her, the coverage of her running mate, although it got a little dicey last week. Basically, she's had an amazing run. And Trump, I think, has been struggling with how to get back on top of the attention economy. So he scheduled a news conference, and the point of it was to say, I'm willing to stand here and answer questions, and she's not, which took me about 5 seconds to say, not 90 minutes. And he did get off the rails on some things. Now, he did say some other things that were perfectly fine and would be part of the case to prosecute. But when you have an ocean of things you said, it's harder to find the little nuggets that mattered the most. And they're struggling with it right now. I will just tell you, as covering it at the level that I do, the campaign knows what it needs to do. Like, they know what they want to do. They know what they need to do. If you look at their paid media, their TV ads, they know what they need and want to do. But a lot of this is on Trump's shoulders, and he has to decide to focus on it or not.
Let me ask you about that, because a lot of us, we're not walking in the same circles as you are in terms of knowing some of the political operatives that are actually involved. How is the Trump team different this year than 4 years ago?
Great question. I think they have been running the most professional, efficient operation of the three tries. And it's not really all that close. He has run, his two main managers are Chris LaCivita, who is an old school political operative that I actually worked with back during the Bush-Cheney years, and Susie Wiles, who's a very well-seasoned operative from Florida. Together, they have formed the top tier of this campaign. They've done a tremendous job. And through a lot of tumult, remember, we've kind of forgotten about it, but Trump did get convicted of felonies in New York. He went through a whole primary. I mean, there was a lot of tumult, through the midterm in 2022. A lot of tumultuous water that they had to navigate, and they did it brilliantly, and they came out of it, were never seriously challenged in the Republican primary. They navigated the trial. I mean, you think about the day that Trump was convicted in New York all the way through the first debate. It was probably the best 6 weeks anybody ever had in a presidential campaign until
the 3 weeks.
Until the 3 weeks Harris had. And so they did what they were hired to do, and they did it ruthlessly and successfully, maybe too successfully. I mean, Joe Biden had to quit the profession that he'd been in for 50 years. They were so good at their job. Can you imagine if any of you all had been in your job for 50 years and somebody literally made you quit? They were so good at it and you were so bad at it. It's amazing that they ran him out of the race. Now they're in a different race, and the challenge is to retool everything. I mean, you're building this whole system to try to run against one thing, and now they've got less than 100 days to run against something totally different.
So looking at Trump again here, does he have? I mean, I guess he's had the capacity in the past to be disciplined.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there seems to be this, I guess, in just one person's observation, sort of this desperation or this frustration of this getting away from me.
I think frustration. I don't think they're desperate. I mean, they have a lot of abilities and a lot of money and a lot of things that a lot of candidates wish they had. I mean, you have to remember, Trump has a very, very high floor. It doesn't matter what he does. It is highly unlikely he'll ever drop below 43, 44%. A lot of campaigns would kill for that kind of floor. Now, he does have a low ceiling. I mean, over half the country, a little over half the country, probably will never vote for him, never even consider voting for him. So it's high floor, low ceiling. The ceiling is high enough to win. They're not without assets, and they're not without capabilities. But what they have not yet come to terms with is that they're no longer running against someone who is worse than what you would call generic Democrat. If you look, when you do polling, sometimes you ask people the generic ballot. Generically, would you rather vote Republican or Democrat? Trump performs a little worse in some ways than generic Republican. Biden was performing significantly worse than generic Democrat. Harris is performing about what you would expect a generic Democrat to do. And when you look at why she's now risen in the polls, and some of them ahead of Trump, it's because a lot of Democrats who just simply were holding out on Biden, and either they were saying they were undecided or they were even saying they will vote for RFK before they voted for Biden, they've come home. It is base consolidation. She is now getting everything, most everything you would expect a generic Democrat to get. Not all of it. We can talk about some of the underlying factors. But most everything you would expect a generic Dem to get, she's getting. Trump is still underperforming some ways, a little bit generic Republican. But that's the difference in the race right now. Why is she winning? Because Biden simply couldn't reach certain people. They had given up on him. They're willing to give her a chance.
To what extent are the issues a factor, if at all, or does it just all come down to how you feel about the person? Because Biden, it seems to me, was being attacked primarily. I mean, the most compelling argument against Biden by a lot of folks was just that he was not competent and had lost too much of his step to be able to not just win re-election, but even, I mean, who believed that he would serve a full 4-year term? So that kind of, to me, it it sort of superseded any kind of issues or agenda arguments that I think that, whether it's on immigration, inflation, energy policy, et cetera, that you would be able to still be able to contest against Kamala Harris. Kamala, though, comes up, she's young. Obviously, she's capable from a physical standpoint. No one, I don't think, would doubt she can finish 4 more years. So is it more about personality or is it more about the issues?
Yeah, I've said for a long time, I sort of calling this the vibes election. It's a really post-policy election. People aren't as interested in the deep policy details from the campaigns as they are on how they make you feel. What's the vibe of this campaign? The vibe between Trump and Biden was pretty obvious, and you said it. Nobody, even Biden's supporters, didn't think he was going to finish 4 years. The vibes have now changed, and Trump was sort of executing not a policy-heavy campaign either. He was just executing against somebody around whom the vibes were terrible. Now the transition has to be made. He's not going to win the vibes contest against Harris. He might win a policy argument against Harris, and that's the challenge for the Trump campaign. Can you stick to her, everything she said when she ran for president before? Can you stick to her, everything you don't like about Joe Biden today? Or is she going to be allowed to get away with essentially acting as though she landed here 6 weeks ago and said, "Oh, I'm new to this game. I guess I'll take over now," when she actually does have a record. But it's Trump's to prosecute. Obviously, the media is not interested in that in that kind of a campaign. So Trump has to do it. And that's why the unfocused public appearances have rattled Republicans, because the more you're talking about things that aren't inflation, immigration, crime, et cetera, every day you lose on that front is a day closer to her getting away with essentially running a policy-free campaign. And that's a vibes campaign, and that's a campaign right now where the vibes have shifted against Trump.
The Real Clear Politics. By the way, you and I are both fans of the website overall.
Yep.
Of Real Clear Politics, and this is the most recent. This is as of last night. The poll average has Harris up. This is national vote. Harris up by 0.5%. What is the 5-way RCP average? What is that?
The 5-way, that would be with all the third-party candidates included.
Gotcha.
RFK, Cornel West.
So she even leads more with RFK in the contest.
Yeah, and let's talk about RFK, because a lot of the campaign coverage focused on him this year was about which candidate is he hurting more. Before Biden got out, I think it was about 4-3, he was hurting Biden more than Trump, pulling from both, but hurting Biden a little more. A lot of recalcitrant Dems were just hiding out there. Now it's pretty obvious he's hurting Trump more than he's hurting Harris, maybe about 3-1, possibly more. So he's down to about 5% in the national polls. I expect him to get less than that. Obviously, Trump has been courting RFK. They had a phone call. There's been some back and forth between them. So at this point, I think it's fair to argue he's helping Harris, and Trump is probably going to try to get him out of the race and into his campaign somehow. I don't know if it's possible at this point for Trump, but if I were in their shoes, I would be trying to get him out of this race, off the ballot, and into my campaign, because it's apparent he's hurting Trump and helping the Democrats.
The battlegrounds has Trump, though, despite everything else here. It's the one category in this Real Clear Politics spread. He's up by nearly a full percentage point.
Yes, in the battleground states, and on the next slide, you have the list of battleground states. So everybody look at these numbers. The spread, 0.8, 0.8, 2.4, 1.5. It's almost irrelevant who's up and who's down, because all of this is one small polling error away from changing the outcome. And I would caution you all, they've never been able to fully capture Trump. In 16 and in 20, nationally and in the battleground states, the polling tends to undershoot Trump. And that's largely because there are a lot of low or no propensity voters who turn out for Trump that just are not pollable. So if you're Trump, even though you're rattled and even though you've had a weird 4 weeks, one thing you can always remember or lean on or take some comfort in is that you have a reservoir of supporters that typically don't show up in the polling. So it may not feel as bad as it looks in terms of how the numbers have shifted in the campaign. Nothing can be taken for granted by either campaign, but if I were Trump, I would now be as focused as ever on ensuring that this sort of unpollable reservoir of supporters, people who tend to be totally disengaged from politics, are able to show up in this election. If they don't turn out, he's not going to win. If they do turn out, they could change the result of every one of these states.
A little historic context. This is where the Democratic and Republican parties have fully flipped.
Yeah.
Where Democratic voters used to be generally more low propensity voters. Republicans were the tried true, are going to show up every time.
It's interesting. The Democrats now have most control of the people who we would call in the business 5 out of 5s or 4 out of 4s, people who vote in every election. This is totally opposite of my whole life in politics. And so the old theory was high turnout help Dems, hurt Republicans. The new paradigm is high turnout may help Trump more than it helps Democrats. I need to really think about that, though, in the Harris era. I was certain of it in the Biden era. I need to think about it, but I still think it's true for one reason, because of the propensity. The lower you go on the scale, the more likely you are to like Trump. So the highest propensity voters like the Democrats the most. 5 out of 5, people with college degrees, senior citizens, people who vote in every election. It's why Democrats are doing well in midterms and in off-year elections. Lower turnout, Democrats doing well. But then you get down to like people who vote in 2 out of 4, 1 out of 4, or 0 out of 4, or maybe even aren't registered at all. I saw one survey among unregistered adults, and believe it or not, there are a lot of them. And Trump was winning by 30 points. So if you were Donald Trump, what do? You change the composition of the electorate by registering these people, putting them in the pool, and then making sure they vote. It's easier said than done. It's very expensive, and it takes a lot of work. But it can be done, and it was most recently successfully done by 2 campaigns that were successful. Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, and George W. Bush in 2004. Both campaigns had a strategy in those cases to take people who the other campaign couldn't reach, put them into the pool, voila, they win a close race.
What danger is there for Kamala Harris? I was talking before, and we can see here, obviously, a younger candidate than anybody we've seen the last, several election cycles. Is there any danger that she might turn off some of the older voters that liked Joe Biden as a senior, and hey, he's one of me?
You're asking the correct question about what coalition does she have to turn out to win. With Biden, he actually had a little bit of strength with seniors. He had it in 2020. He had a little bit of strength with older, white, working-class voters, important in Pennsylvania. So he did have a few little things that most Democrats don't have. So there has been some theorizing on the Republican side that maybe Harris won't have that. I don't know if we know that yet. I think the verdict is still out on that. I'm still waiting for more data on that. But that is the theory. Is her path to victory more like the old Obama, they called it the coalition of the ascendant. Younger, more diverse, cede the sort of white vote more to the Republicans and take advantage of the Hispanic, African-American youth. That's the old Obama coalition. That's how he won. The one thing about this that could upend that apple cart is the Hispanic vote. Biden was heavily struggling with Hispanics, well beyond what Democrats normally do, well underneath what they normally do. There is some polling evidence that she's also struggling with the Hispanic vote as well. And there's this idea that this working class, this minority working class, non-college working class coalition that spans all races, but especially among Hispanics, moving away from Democrats and towards Republicans. This was really a drag on Biden's campaign. And again, I'm still waiting for more data, but it seems apparent to me that we are on the cusp of a major shift in this Hispanic vote towards the Republicans. The question of the algebra is, on the other side of it, is can you make up for it if you're Harris by adding more college-educated, suburban, centrish type people? Can you get them to vote for you? That's how you make up for it. And that's really always been the algebra of this election between the two parties. College-educated voters moving out of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, working-class voters of all races moving out of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. which is more and which will turn out more. That to me is the fundamental question of this election. It was before, it is now, and can she do better than Biden at that algebra?
Since we're talking about demographics of the candidates, and obviously Kamala Harris is has both black as well as Indian, heritage, and the Trump campaign, when Joe Biden was still Democratic nominee, was really emphasizing the inroads that they were making among the black population.
Yes.
The question is, does her candidacy nullify that? And is this why, going back to Donald Trump a moment ago and talking about his frustration, is this why he's kind of going off the rails and questioning what her race is? Or I'm trying to figure out what the reasoning is behind it. Psychoanalyze Donald Trump for me.
How much time you got, buddy? Let me talk about the demographic question first. It is true the Trump campaign was making a huge move to try to get more African American votes. And they were, if you believe polling, and a lot of the polling was very consistent, they were succeeding. He was achieving in most national polls 20%, 22, 24, even 25 in some cases of African Americans. You have to assume that with Harris, it's not going to get that high. But the question is, can you shave any points off of it at all? And I think where you're going to continue to see Trump try to move on that front is African American men. The two dividing lines of American politics are still educational attainment, do you have a college degree or not, and gender, men versus women. College degrees, females, moving Democrat. Non-college, males, moving Republican. And so I would expect Trump to continue to try to do with African-American men what he's doing with Hispanic men, and that is appeal to them from the coalition of the working class. We're the working class party. They're not listening to you either economically or culturally. I am. We'll see if he can do it. I still think he is going to do better among African-American men than any Republican candidate since I got into the business in the year 2000. The question is it enough to change anything materially or fundamentally? I think he's clearly going to do worse with Harris in the race than with Biden in, but just a few points here and there could make a difference in Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and obviously these are cities in the states that matter.
My other question, as we go to look at Nate Silver, is another forecaster, and it shows the shift in the last week and month from Republican to Democrat overall. Before we kind of crunch those numbers, Scott, you mentioned before about this being a vibes election, and Kamala Harris kind of riding that wave right now. If you're, and since you mentioned before about the low propensity voters, are they more prone to be caught up in a vibe? In other words,
yes.
So you see my point.
Yes, 100%, and that's a great observation. When I say low propensity or even no propensity voters, I mean, you think about people who are completely or almost completely disengaged from our civic affairs. People who are not consuming political media, people who are not interested in, cultivating any kind of a news diet that has anything to do with politics at all. So what are they hearing about an election? Are they reading deeply into a candidate's website about their, page 8 of their tax policy? No. They are picking up on cultural vibes. This is why at the Republican National Convention, Hulk Hogan, you may have seen, was on stage ripping his shirt off. Hulk Hogan is not going to be Secretary of State, sadly, but he did, however, I'll just remind you, he did defeat the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov in the 80s. I'm just saying, you could do worse. You could do worse than the Hulkster in your foreign policy. But think about, by the way, they let me meet Hulk Hogan at the RNC. I don't know if any of you all are here in your mid-40s and grew up watching Hulk Hogan, but I've been trying to meet this guy for 40 years. He was a little nervous. I met him right before he spoke. He was a little nervous.
He wasn't nervous by meeting you. He was nervous about talking to
he was nervous, and I said, are you okay? He said, I've never done politics, brother. Called me brother, which was amazing. And I said, well, you did body slam Andre the Giant in front of 90,000 people at the Pontiac Silverdome. I think it's okay. He said, this is so out of character. I've never done this. Politics, never done it. Of course, he did great. But the reason he was there was because think about who would be following like the cultural touch point of Hulk Hogan. White, working class, males, mid-40s, early 50s, people who are not necessarily high consumers of political media but might be consumers of cultural media. There's a reason that made sense. There's a reason it makes sense for Kamala Harris to have Megan Thee Stallion performing concerts at her events, trying to reach a coalition or a cohort of voters, probably not reading Politico every day, probably not watching CNN State of the Union on Sunday morning, but in their social media feeds, are they likely to be getting served clips of famous singers or famous celebrities saying things? Of course. That's the vibe. That's the vibe. And so you can see which vibe each campaign is competing for. And although I discount the idea that a celebrity could change your mind, like Hulk Hogan's not going to change your mind, but I don't discount that a celebrity could reach someone who may not have even thought about voting. And maybe it got them to focus a little bit on it. Maybe it got them to pick up on some little thing, and now they're more likely to be in the voter pool. So the vibes right now favor Harris. They were favoring Trump. They could switch back. And I don't discount that each party now has this kind of little cadre of celebrities who are helping. The Democrats have more celebrities. They've always had more celebrities. Trump has different kinds of celebrities than any Republican has ever had. He's got Hulk Hogan. He's got Kid Rock. He's got the UFC people. You know, Republicans traditionally just don't have any of this. Democrats have what they've always had, which is the big Hollywood celebs. They do matter because in a post-policy world, who are we listening to? These people have some of the biggest megaphones in American culture.
I am curious, by a show of hands, raise your hand if you are following the presidential race closely. Okay. Raise your hand if you have made an intentional decision to tune everything out. A few. Okay, I was just curious.
Who in here, raise your hand if you have a college degree. All right. I mean, that again.
Why is that question?
Because, again, it's not voter registration anymore. Two things, college degree and gender. If I know those two things about you, I can make pretty accurate predictions about what you have or may do in an upcoming election. And this is how look at the splits in the polling. It's pretty obvious which ways the parties are going on this. And I hate to generalize everybody into one of two camps, but if you look at the splits, that's where they are. We're not red and blue America anymore. We're college or non-college, meaning white collar versus blue collar, and we're men and women. And it matters so much more than your voter reg or even what you have thought of yourself in the past. These are the two attributes that matter the most to the political strategist right now.
I'll pull up the slide again here if we can of the Silver Bulletin. As I said before, Nate Silver for many years was the 538 was his website, and then he was with ABC, and now he's on his own. But the biggest takeaway from just looking at these numbers is just the change, right? And this is just doubling back on Kamala Harris having quite the 3 weeks.
It is amazing what base consolidation can do. Trump has had a consolidated Republican base really since before the primary was even over. It consolidated even further after he was convicted, and that manifested itself in a little boost in the polling, but a lot of boost in the fundraising. Biden never had it. I mean, there were just so many Democrats who didn't want to do it. Now they have a Democrat that they can live with, and so all these Dems who were so resistant. You think of it like Joe Biden was Pepe Le Pew, and these Democrat voters were the cat, constantly trying to get away. Now they don't have Pepe Le Pew anymore. They have something better that doesn't stink. And so now the cat is more willing. And so you have these base voters who have come home, and generic Democrat is pretty good and in the national polling, and that's what she's occupying.
I'll pull back up before you bring up any other cultural references after Hulk Hogan and Pepe Le Pew. This is the map we started with of the no toss-ups,
Yep.
right?
This is the no toss-up map. So this is where it stands today. And again, it's these states that we all thought were going to be the toss-up states that Trump had been moving ahead in, now fully back to toss-up status. Absolutely.
So at this point, 235 to 226 Republicans with the advantage. We're going to go ahead on the next one here, and we're going to give the that blue wall you talked about, at least as far as Wisconsin and Michigan, to Kamala Harris. At this point now, we're at 251 Democrats, 235 Republicans.
Yeah. So let's just say she starts to rebuild, and now she's moving closer. She's not there yet, though. And the Sun Belt
This is what the polls show right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, they're leaning more this direction of giving her those states I just gave her, right?
Yep. And now the Sun Belt in this is still open.
So let's go ahead and we'll shift that now according to the polls.
Yep.
Now the Sun Belt
Goes back to the Republicans.
And so now you're talking about 268
Yep.
to 251, and my math tells me it's only 2 votes shy of an electoral college victory for Donald Trump.
Now I want to draw your attention to one thing. Pennsylvania. If you leave here today only remembering one thing, it's that this entire race comes down to Pennsylvania. He or she who wins Pennsylvania has a 96+% chance of being the next president. And so, under this scenario, which is a very, very possible and even likely scenario, the winner of this state will get either, if you're Donald Trump, 287, or if you're Kamala Harris, 270. Now, if you will linger for just a moment on the Democrat 270 map, I do want to draw your attention to one thing. 270 is the minimum. You see the state of Nebraska, and there's one little blue speck in the middle of Nebraska. It's Omaha. In Nebraska, they allocate their electoral votes in a strange way. You get some for winning the state, but you also get some for winning individual congressional districts. So in order to get to 270, Harris will have to win this configuration of states that you have, but also, while losing Nebraska, winning this congressional district. Highly possible that she can. It was even possible that Biden could have won it. This is a suburban area, high concentration of college degrees. So the way to get there in the bare minimum scenario includes lose the Sun Belt, win the blue wall, and get one electoral vote in Omaha. Now, if she doesn't do that, and she does all this, but somehow Trump wins Omaha, now you're in a 269 scenario. It goes to the U.S. House of Representatives. And if you think all hell broke loose 3 weeks ago, get ready.
And bear in mind, by the way, that the difference between the House, because we know the House, of course, is a very razor-thin margin from a popular the roster perspective, but constitutionally, correct me if I'm wrong, the House vote is according to every state gets one vote.
Every state delegation gets a vote. So you know, there are delegations that have one House member. That's a pretty powerful person. And then there are delegations like California, New York, and Texas that have a bunch.
But in this situation, it's basically like the Senate in that regard. I mean,
Right.
Everyone's going to get one vote.
And this would favor Trump.
That would favor Trump. Because obviously you could look at we'll go to the no toss-up, you look at what you're looking at right there.
Yeah.
Is pretty good representation of the House as well.
I just want to, even as you look at this and you can see there's an easy pathway for Trump to win, I just want to caution everyone. These polls and these swing states are close, very close. In 2020, 44,000 votes in 3 states, if they had changed, would have changed the outcome of the election. 44,000 votes in 3 states. It is extremely close. We are a small polling error away from one thing or the other happening in any state. You're a small alteration of the composition of the electorate away from something happening that you didn't expect. So if you love Kamala Harris and you see that she's up in a state by a half a point, do not rejoice. And if you love Donald Trump and you see that he's up in a state by a half a point, do not rejoice. You have all the reason in the world to worry, and you cannot hang your hat on a poll that is that close. And right now, in the states that matter, it is all fully too close to call.
Before we take a couple of questions, just a quick couple of comments from you on the running mate factors. The Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, has been most people look at this as being a success for the Harris campaign, the rollout.
Yeah, I'll generally say about running mates, I don't think they matter all that much. I think electorally they matter very little. Neither Walz nor Vance are going to deliver a state because I think those states were already delivered. And so I do, my belief was that she should have picked Shapiro from Pennsylvania for the reasons I stated moments ago. She needs to win Pennsylvania. There's virtually no scenario where Harris loses Pennsylvania and wins the presidency. I would have picked Shapiro. I think she had internal pressures preventing her from doing that. So I think it's fine. I think Vance is fine. I don't think either of them is going to do something magical for these tickets. Walz's military records being picked over, Vance's past statements are being picked over. Eventually, this will give way to focus on the top of the ticket. There's nobody in America who was going to vote for Donald Trump who now won't because of Vance, or who wasn't voting for Trump who now will because of Vance. So I think Walz is basically the same. And so both probably could have made different choices that would have been better or worse for different reasons. I have tried to resist overstating the importance of any of this.
Any questions from you guys? Raise your hand. And while you think about that, I do want to ask you, Scott, just going back to one other map here. From an energy policy standpoint, we're always concerned about what actually can they do once they're in office.
Yep.
It's going to take the House and Senate being factors with that. How does this map affect the congressional election this fall?
Regardless of what happens in the White House, it is highly, highly likely Republicans will control the Senate. There is not a single Republican incumbent who is in danger. There are many Democratic incumbents that are in danger. One is already gone. Joe Manchin is retiring. The governor of West Virginia, Justice, is going to go to the Senate. So at a minimum, the Senate is 50-50. And then you have a whole menu of other states. I'll start with the one that I think is most likely to fall, which is Montana. I think Sheehy, the Republican, is currently beating Tester, the Democrat. Trump went to Montana.
Tester's the incumbent.
Yeah, Trump went to Montana, and the Democrats were laughing at him for going to a non-battleground state. But for people who care about policy, it is absolutely a battleground state because it may be the one that determines control of the U.S. Senate. If Republicans win there, they're at 51, ball game. But there are others. Nevada, Arizona, which I find unlikely for Republicans, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. There's a lot of states on the map. All the Republicans have to do is win one thing in addition to West Virginia. That's any of those states I mentioned or the vice presidency. They'll control the Senate. So regardless of who wins the White House, I'm forecasting divided government. But to me right now, Montana is obviously – Ohio, I forgot Ohio. Montana is obviously the best pickup opportunity for the Republicans. I think it's actually the one state where Republicans are currently ahead. If you look at some of the Senate polling in these other states, even in states where Trump is winning, the Republicans are running a little behind the Democrats on the Senate side. Not in Montana. I think Sheehy's ahead, and I think Trump's going to win Montana by 20-plus points. Therefore, to me, it is one of the most important places on the map.
So you're forecasting the Senate will switch Democrat to Republican. Will the House switch Republican to Democrat?
Oh, gosh. The House is hard to forecast. I think it's really dependent upon the national popular vote. I think Harris undoubtedly is better for the House than Biden was. I mean, there's a reason Biden said he got out of the race because he was a drag on the ticket. I think that was true. And so just the enthusiasm bump alone probably is better for Democrats, but it's exceedingly close. I don't know who's going to win the House. I think it's basically a 50-50, maybe a slight advantage to Republicans, maybe, just because of the way some of it shook out. But I wouldn't bet more than a few bucks on it. And I would also just say that whichever party wins it, they're going to be right back in the same position that the Republicans are in today, a very slim majority and a speaker that's constantly trying to keep all the cats in the bag, which is exceedingly difficult in Washington.
To your questions, if we have any.
I was going to ask a quick question, and I'll go around. But, Scott, kind of like the CNN panel there, how are we going – we talked a little bit about energy policy this morning, and it just seems like we just can't bring this together to get a consistent policy to take the country forward on energy. But I can pick any policy there is. What's it going to take for kind of the United States to come together on these big policy issues that we're going to have to address sometime, from the economy to China to energy what's it going to take?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think like most issues, Chris, it would take some kind of massive societal upheaval for us to get serious. And we've had some upheaval in some states with rolling blackouts and whatnot. Certainly had price spikes because of policy choices. But it obviously hasn't been enough societal upheaval yet. I mean, I do think the differences in these two tickets are vast. Harris was a strong supporter of Green New Deal, ban on fracking. Now she is saying she's changing her views on that. Trump obviously has been a sort of wide open kind of guy. But that's just the surface level policy choices that would also have some congressional impact. That doesn't even begin to address the administrative policy choices via appointees and the administrative state. So, and then of course you throw on top of that the Supreme Court and the Chevron case now. So there is a lot of under the radar upheaval on this in Washington, but the differences between the two parties may be as steep on this issue as any in the election. I mean, my view is what Mitch McConnell's view is, that if Harris wins and the Democrats somehow ever got full control of the Congress, they would immediately eliminate the Senate filibuster and enact policies that match more what you see on the farther left end of their party, and that's his great concern. But I would say there is no issue where the parties are farther apart than on this one right here, my view.
Anybody got any questions? Okay. Anything you want to wrap up, Joe, Scott?
Any advice? Actually, one question for you before we go.
Oh, yeah.
Kentucky-wise.
The governor.
So he was considered, or at least was vetted, and I saw his tweet saying, he's glad to be back here in the state with his dog and his family. What's his Andy Beshear's future look like? Do you think if Harris wins, is he a cabinet secretary or the attorney general, as one person suggested?
Oh gosh, I think yes. I mean, I think if he wanted to be, I mean, he has been nationally elevated to the point now where I think if he wanted to be in a cabinet, I would think that's a distinct possibility. The question is, do you want it, or is your future in electoral politics? I mean, we'll have potentially an open seat for the Senate in 26. That's not official. It's potential. And then we'll have people on both parties vying for that. He has to leave the governor's office in 27. So I think for him, it's either, do I go federal electorally, or do I go federal by appointment, or do I go into the private sector a while and see how it shakes out? But yeah, I mean, he is a two-term Democrat governor, was on, the moderate list for vice president. I think if he wanted to be in the cabinet, I don't know why that wouldn't happen.
Thank you, Scott. We'll see you at the DNC on CNN, and
we'll be there. I'll be there with David Axelrod, Van Jones, and all the rest of your favorite TV characters. We'll all be there, and we'll do our best to bring the best coverage. Thank you all for watching. And by the way, if I may, before we go,
yes,
as you all know, in addition to this job that I have on television, my firm, RunSwitch, here in Kentucky, and at the direction of our senior vice president and my partner, Kaylee Price, who's right over here, have been longtime partners of the electric co-ops. We know many of you and have known many of you for many years. We're extremely grateful for you. We believe in what you do. We're happy to fight for you. We're proud to fight for you, and we're going to keep doing that. And I just wanted to say how proud we are to be part partners with you, Joe, you, Chris, and all of you here. So thank you for the confidence you've placed in us over the years. We sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you all.